Prepare for a Rood Awakening.
This is Michael Rood overlooking the Red Sea, or in Hebrew, the Yam Suf, the body of water that the Israelites crossed on dry land nearly 3,400 years ago. In our last episode, we finally made it to Mount Sinai with Jim and Penny Caldwell, the American oilfield engineer and his wife who spent 9 years collecting the evidence at the mountain that reassures us that the Hebrew Scriptures are, in fact, an accurate record of the land and people of which they speak. We analyzed the petroglyphs of the Egyptian cow and bull gods Apis and Hathor that festoon the remains of the altar to the golden calf. We saw a few of the thousands of petroglyphs of sandaled feet that decorate the Saudi peninsula. Now you will find out why Israel spent the time and intensive labor to chisel those footprints into the stones of the land. To investigate these footprints, we will travel into the Negev desert of southern Israel to inspect one of the camping sites of the Israelites during their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. There we will see those same rock carvings done by the same artist who decorated the stones in the ancient land of Midian. You are about to see future and ancient prophecy come together before your very eyes. Now, episode 8 in the 11-part series, The Sinai Connection, Israel's ancient title deed to the land. Har Karkum. This mountaintop in the Negev desert of southern Israel is littered with the charred fragments of an asteroid impact that formed the Ramon crater to our north. When the nation of Israel camped here during their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, they chiseled more than 40,000 petroglyphs into these burned asteroid fragments. Some of these labor-intensive etchings appear to be little more than the artistic expression of young shepherd boys tending the flock. But this petroglyph of sandaled feet is one of the ancient property markers of the sons of Israel, who were promised by the Almighty, every place that the sole of your foot shall tread, that have I given you as your inheritance, from the river Euphrates to the great river in Egypt. That promise was taken literally, and the Israelites etched the imprint of their sandaled feet into the very stones of the land as they went. Every place that these petroglyphs of sandaled feet are found legally belongs to Israel, including the vast oil field of Midian in Saudi Arabia, where thousands of these footprints, fixed in stone, record the identity of the true owners of the land. There in Saudi Arabia are thousands upon thousands of petroglyphs of the sandaled feet of the Israelites. Why did they take the time to do that? Because long before there were any Jewish lawyers who could appear before the claim offices and the courts, Israel took the promises of the Almighty to Abraham and to his offspring, the promises that were spoken to Moses and to Joshua, that every place that the sole of your foot treads, that have I given you as your inheritance. From the river Euphrates to the river Nile. They took the time to chisel the imprint of their sandaled feet into the stones of the land. They chiseled the imprint of their children's feet into those stones. That was the sign that they took the Almighty literally at his promise. This was the promise that he made with Abraham. And as a countersign, God made sure that those sandals never wore out for the entire 40 years that they wandered through the wilderness. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a miracle. Those leather sandals normally would last just a season, just a few months before you had to make a new pair and go on from there. But when they took the time to chisel the imprint of their little children's feet into the stones of the land, signifying this belongs to Israel, this belongs to us, the Almighty made sure that those sandals never wore out. Those sandals grew with their feet. They lasted for an entire generation until they came into the land of Israel proper. And as they crossed the Jordan River, the manna ceased. They were in the land, and they were to subdue the land. They were to purge the land of every last vestige of pagan sun god worship. They were to completely subdue it, and they were to be a nation of priests. They were to be a kingdom of prophets, to speak the truth to the entire world. And those sandaled feet, to this very day, bear testimony that in the last days the promises made to Abraham will come true, that that land will go to the children of Israel, and it does not matter what the United Nations, the United States, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, or anyone else desires. The end result is the Almighty will fulfill His word and His will. These petroglyphs of sandaled feet are Israel's ancient title deed to the land. In America, they have concocted a religion which says that God's promises to Abraham and his children are null and void, that God will not keep His promise to them. They said that every promise that the Almighty ever made to Israel now belongs to Gentile Christians. Well, if God can renege on His promises to Abraham, don't you think for 1 second that His promises to you are worth the paper that they're written on. If He cannot keep His promises to Israel, then He cannot be trusted at His word. But I will guarantee you, His promises will be kept, and this is the generation that we are going to see these things come to pass. And we recall just a few short months ago, it seems, that the United States military brought to bear an incredible firepower upon the nation of Iraq. And at the end of that, all of the land from the Euphrates over to the Nile didn't go to the children of Israel. Of course, that wasn't the goal. I'm just saying that was a horrendous amount of firepower, and it didn't move anyone 1 inch closer to the promises that the Almighty had made with the children of Israel. In fact, the United States used their attack against Iraq as a pressuring point to try to get Israel to give up the claim to the land and to go back on the promise that the Almighty had made with Abraham. But that is not the way that this whole thing is going to settle out. So now I would like to take you to Israel for the Feast of Sukkot in 2001. Those of you who were with us on the first Prophecy Club tour in the year 2000, remember, as I went around and did the Fall Feast of the Lord, each location, each city that I went to, and I finished that meeting by teaching the Fall Feast of the Lord, which was recorded and now is in that complete package on the prophecies in the Feast of the Lord. You recognize that when I taught that night, that was the last meeting of the Prophecy Club. For 7 years, from 1993 until 2000, the Prophecy Club had sounded the warning, and that night was the last meeting of the Prophecy Club until it was restarted just recently. And it was after we determined the month of the Aviv barley in the land of Israel, and so we knew what the calendar was going to be for that year, the biblical calendar, not the pagan calendar that we are all familiar with in the Western world, but the biblical calendar we determined to be correct when the barley was Aviv in the land of Israel. That was the first month of the year. And I said during that tour that if we have correctly corrected the biblical calendar this year, we will see violence erupt in Jerusalem on September 28th, of 2000. Now we look back at that date and we recognize that September 28th of 2000, that is when Ariel Sharon, who was not then prime minister, went up on to the Temple Mount. He opened the book of Ezekiel and read the last day prophecy of Ezekiel, and that is when the violence erupted on the Temple Mount. The bloodshed began on that date, September 28, 2000, and as of right now, over 3,000 people have died from that intifada or that uprising. Now, I did not say this by revelation. An angel did not come to me and say that September 28th we are going to see violence erupt in Jerusalem. I was simply going by the biblical calendar and recognizing that this covenant with death that Israel entered into on the White House lawn between Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, with Bill Clinton acting as the guarantor for the United Nations, that agreement that they made, which is called the Oslo Accords, which Oslo in modern Hebrew means toilet seat. Tell me that the Almighty does not have a sense of humor. They entered into that covenant, and 7 years later, it was supposed to result in Israel giving over East Jerusalem to the enemy, and part of the land of Israel, part of this covenant land, to the enemy. And according to that, I determined that that would be the date that violence would erupt. I can't claim any divine revelation. It was simply a calculation. Now, I also expected that a month later, within a month later, this would go into full-blown warfare. It didn't. And I, for one, was rather thankful. I live in Israel. You know, I appreciate just a little bit more time and a little bit more peace in which I can continue to get work done. Because if I remember the words of the Lord right, he said to go into the whole world and preach the good news all over the earth. And until he calls me off, I am like a dog on a scent. You know, we've got a job to do. And if we've got a little bit more time of peace, I'd rather preach the gospel of the good news of the returning Messiah without any radiation burns. You know, I'm kind of happy when I've got a little bit more time. But I do know, and I have preached, and I have said, thus saith the Lord, the fall feast of the Lord will be fulfilled to the very day, the very hour, the exact moment, and every detail in which they were rehearsed for 1,000 years. There is nothing that is going to stop the fall feast of the Lord from being fulfilled. That is, thus saith the Lord. My calculations of when I think it might happen, I'm ready every year. I don't know about you, but we ought to be ready for things to go down and for us to continue on that path. The fall of 2001 was no different. It was at the Feast of Tabernacles just a few days before that I actually fly into Israel, and this is going to be my home from then on for the rest of my life. I moved to Israel. I arrived in Jerusalem just a couple of days before the feast, and just about a mile outside of the old city of Jerusalem, that is where we get together. We have an apartment there, but we build our sukkah for the Feast of Sukkot, and we build it large enough. Only 3 or 4 men are going to sleep in it, but it's large enough to where we can put a table in it, and we can get 15, 20 people around the table, because the Feast of Sukkot in Jerusalem is an absolute hoot. There is nothing like it. People come from all over the world. Messianic Jews from all over the planet come to Jerusalem, and many of them get together around our table in our sukkah. And each night, as we dine and as we read the scriptures and share with each other, we have to determine what language we're going to read the scripture in, what language we are going to talk in, and who's got to translate for whom. It's so much fun doing this. This Feast of Sukkot, on the first day, Joshua Cohen came out from the old city. Joshua Cohen is a good friend of mine. Joshua is a Cohen, a Kohanim. He's a priest of Israel, and he's Messianic. He's a believer in Messiah. And he has built his sukkah in the old city. He's going to be sleeping there at night under the stars in the old city. We are sleeping outside of the gate by a bit of a distance. But he came out that morning and he said to me, "What is it about this woman that the prophet speaks of?" He said, I believe it's Jeremiah, I'm not sure, but there is a woman who is so evil that they put her in a basket and then put a lead lid on it. And I said, "What?" And I realized that, it could be the translation that he's reading. He's fluent in like 6 languages, and who knows what translation he's reading. And I said, "Well, I just read the whole book of Jeremiah last week. I don't remember anything about a woman who is so evil they put her in a basket with a lead lid on it." He said, "Well, maybe it's not Jeremiah, but every day I wake up and this is haunting me. And I'm trying to picture this, and I have no idea what it means. Do you know what it is?" And I looked at him in kind of a blank stare, and then other people came in, introductions started, and we just kind of left it. The Feast of Tabernacles every day. Someone is there. We've got food on the table all day long. In the evening, everyone's together. We stay up late at night. And now at the end of the week, it's the 6th day, it's going on Shabbat, and at this point, I've had about as much fellowship as I can stand for 1 week. So I go upstairs, and before the sun goes down, I print out the entire book of Zechariah. Now, if you ask me why, I have no idea why I printed it out, but I just felt compelled to study the book of Zechariah, probably because I've been seriously studying it for, 30 years, and I still don't understand it. It was just written just a few blocks away, and, the opportunity to study the book of Zechariah, so I printed out the whole thing, big 12-point font, and this is how I like to study the Bible. And this is how I like to spend Shabbat. That night after dinner, I retire to my room, and I began reading. And I have a pen in my hand, and I began diagramming the sentences, and I want to make sure that I understand to whom the relative pronouns relate, and, I'm retranslating the words because I want to make sure I understand the English. And that's all I have in front of me. I just printed out the King James Version of the Bible. That's all I have in front of me. No Hebrew, no lexicons, no concordances. I'm just studying the Bible the way I like to do it. Because I want to get there. I want to hear the words that Zechariah has heard. I want to taste the same revelation. I want to put myself in that culture, in his day and time, and to see and smell what he's seeing and hearing and tasting and touching. And so as I am working on it, a couple hours pass, and I fall asleep. I wake up in the morning, the light's still on, I've got the paper still on my chest, the pen's still in my hand. So I take a drink of water, I stay in bed, and I just keep reading. This is the way I love to spend the Sabbath. Don't even get out of bed. When the sun goes down that night, get out of bed, get dressed, make dinner, but I love just to read the Word all day long. I don't get to do it very often, but it's like a treasure. This is precious. And to do it in Jerusalem during the Feast of Tabernacles, as it says that the angel of the Lord, the angel of Yahweh, goes before us to prepare our way for the feast. And to be there in a sukkah, in and around Jerusalem, it's a treat that I would encourage all of you to participate in. That morning, I read and I'm working away for at least 5 hours, maybe even longer. It's after lunchtime. And I come to this verse in chapter 5, and it says, "And behold, there was lifted up a talent of lead, and this is a woman that sits in the midst of the ephah. And he said, This is wickedness. And he cast it into the midst of the ephah, and cast the weight of lead upon the mouth thereof." Aha! This is what Cohen was talking about. This woman that's so evil that they put her in a basket and put a lead lid on it. I recognize it immediately as that. But then I sat up on the edge of my bed, and I shouted out to the top of my voice, "This is not a woman, this is a fire. This is not a woman, this is a fire." And when I said those words, I got up out of bed, I wrote the whole 5th chapter of Zechariah out, I went downstairs to the sukkah where Cohen was, who was fluent in Hebrew, and also another believer who was a lawyer from America going to yeshiva, Hebrew, and also Chaim, who knows a little Hebrew as well. And I said, sit down, I've got to read something to you. And so I said, when I get to the word woman here, I'm going to instead translate it as the word fire. And the lawyer said, you can't do that. What's the Hebrew word? I said, I don't know what the Hebrew word is. I'm just reading King James English, but I want you to listen to this, see what you see, and when I come to this word, I'm going to say the word fire. And he said, no. All I have to do is look it up. All I have to do is open the Bible, and I'll tell you what it is. I said, no. Just listen. So finally he said, okay. They weren't happy, but they were going to let me do it. So I read on down the scriptures, and as I read on down, I got to the end, their jaws dropped on the table, and Chaim said, okay, now what is the Hebrew word? The lawyer opened it up, read on down, and he said, Asha, fire offering. It's Asha. It's a fire. Right then, I knew that it was revelation. Until that moment, I wasn't sure. I thought, it could have been a harebrained idea. Who knows? And I am very reluctant to say the Lord told me anything, because at this point, I don't know. But when he said that the Hebrew was Asha, fire offering, I knew this was revelation, because there is no way that I could know it. There is no way that I could see it. I had nothing in front of me that would even let my mind go in that direction. But when I sat up on the edge of my bed, I said, this is not a woman, this is a fire. And what I saw, I want to share with you tonight. Because in the Hebrew, the word Asha for fire is the same as Isha, the word woman. Isha's man, Isha is woman. What is the difference between Asha and Isha? Nothing. There is no difference. It's the same word. They are the same Hebrew letters. The only difference is one dot that changes it from being a to a I, Isha. But the dots were not put in the text of the scripture until 300 of the Common Era in Tiberias by the Masoretes. You come up and look at this Torah scroll, and there is not one single vowel pointing in here. You can only know by context what these words are. So it is with the words of the prophets. The prophet Zechariah, I have had the scroll of Zechariah in my hands. It says right there, Asha. The Masoretes put a vowel point because a fire in a basket didn't make any sense in Zechariah's day. But then again, how much sense does an evil woman in a basket make with a lead lid on it? There was no context to understand the words of Zechariah, who saw the last days, who saw the wars that were going to transpire, that would finally put all of the land from the river Euphrates to the river Nile into the hands of the children of Israel. Join us again next time for episode 9 of the 11-part series, The Sinai Connection, Israel's ancient title deed to the land. This is Michael Rood, overlooking the Yam Suf, bidding you shalom, peace, and I will see you when the smoke clears.